Welcome to EVONA Origin Stories, the space podcast where we bring you extraordinary leaders from within the sector as we explore their fascinating stories of early life, career, and how they broke into the space industry. In today's episode, we're joined by Laura Forczyk. With almost 20 years industry experience, Laura is a renowned space consultant, career coach, and the founder and executive director of Astralytical, a space consulting firm that empowers businesses, governments, non-profits, and professionals around the globe to grow in the exciting and fast-paced space sector. Laura is also the author of two fascinating books, Rise of the Space Age Millennials and Becoming Off-Worldly. And as if that wasn't enough, she's currently working on her third book, which delves into making human spaceflight more accessible and inclusive for everyone, including people with disabilities. With a lifelong passion for space and a background in astrophysics and planetary science, Laura has successfully transitioned her skills into her unique niche today. In this episode, we discuss Laura's journey into the industry, the invaluable lessons she learned along the way, as well as the diverse and exciting roles available in the space industry to anyone with a dream.
Hello.
Hi,
Hello.
how are you?
Doing well. Good to connect with you.
Yeah, definitely. Really glad to connect. This is going to be a really interesting conversation. I've kind of had a look of what you're about and what Astralytical are all about, and I think there's some very clear kind of shared visions for the industry and the future of the industry and how we kind of progress forward. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of getting into it with you today.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Perfect. Right, let's jump straight in then. I think a great place to kind of begin speaking about people's space career journeys is at the very beginning. So talk us through kind of where you grew up, where you started in life, at school, and then your early career.
I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in that general area, and I always loved science and space, especially when my parents sent me to space camp in Huntsville, Alabama. And I knew I wanted to be an astronaut. I knew that from third grade, but I didn't really know how to get there. So I studied science, I studied history, I studied English, all these subjects in like high school that I thought would benefit me, but also that I just enjoyed. And then when it came to going to university, I wanted to be near a NASA center. And I don't like the cold. So I wanted to move south. So being near Kennedy Space Center was because to me, it was the passion of the exploration of space plus physics, which I had found in high school that I actually really loved physics. And that really opened my eyes to all the possibilities out there in space. And it wasn't really until grad school that I realized there's a business aspect to space as well and a policy aspect. And I felt that there was so much overlap between my interests with history, with international relations, and with the general how do we get people to space concept along with my background in astrophysics. So I actually switched over to planetary science for my graduate studies and got some more hands-on work in the lab studying like Regulus simulants. So that's the dirt and dust on planetary bodies, especially the moon was my passion. I always, since I was a kid, wanted to go to the moon. And so for me, it was like, okay, how do I combine all these different interests? Well, here's a professor who's trying to figure out how we work with the dirt and dust that's on the planets, or we call planetary science is called the moon planet. And in that case, it was not just the moon, it was Mars, it was asteroids, it was all of these planetary bodies that people might actually go visit. And if not people in the near term, most definitely robots. And so it was combining all of these interests of how do we physically go do this? And that really introduced me to all the possibilities out there in space and opened me up to my first career job, which I don't know if you want me to take it from there.
Yeah, great. So it'll be great to hear about because it's really interesting to hear how you said you went to space camp, always had this interest in science and space, but you explored kind of other, like you said, history, English, and then it's so great to kind of see the amalgamation of that and to kind of hear about the realization that you had that there's so many parts to the space industry and there's so many routes into it and there's so many ways that you can impact change through through the different skills and the different kind of experiences and knowledge you have. So yeah, what about what was your first job? What was your early career?
The beautiful thing about getting introduced to the space industry is that it becomes much more diverse than you realize. And that's what happened in my first full-time job. I worked at CASIS, which is also known as ISS National Laboratory. It is a nonprofit that handles a lot of the scientific payloads on the International Space Station for the benefit of life on Earth. And I started very early in that organization where I was the first physicist that they hired. So I was helping out not just with all of the physical science projects, also the remote sensing, the technology development, but also a bit on the biological sciences side too, just because we had such a small science team. So it was very multidisciplinary. But not only that, our job was to evaluate the research, yes, but also talk to the researchers, talk to the inventors, talk to people in business development and marketing. So it was all of these different people combined who were trying to fly payloads to the International Station, was convincing them that there's really in space to benefit your product, to benefit your research, to benefit your service, whatever it has to be, explaining not just the microgravity environment, but also the radiation environment, also the way that the International Space Station is run with the environmental control and life support system, with the power grid and how it has to cycle through day and night every 45 minutes, and the batteries, and all of these things that make up how we live in orbit that eventually can help us live beyond orbit. But the mission of CASIS, ISS National Lab, was to benefit life on Earth. I think that's where people get lost if they're not familiar with the space sector, if they're not familiar with how space impacts their everyday lives. They just don't see why we're spending money and time on this. So in addition to all of the satellites that we have in orbit that most people don't even realize are up there benefiting them, the weather satellites, the GPS or GNSS satellites, the remote sensing that gives us all this data, even really good science is being done on space station and future commercial space stations as well, having to do with how we live and work in remote areas, how we communicate in remote areas, all the different science benefits of understanding the human body or drug development, or all of these ways that we can really make a difference on life on Earth. And people just don't realize this. And it opened up my eyes because I was only aware of a small segment, having come from the physics side of things. And so it really helped me to see not just where the research can do a lot of good, but also business and how businesses can actually make a profit and do commerce in space, which led me to my second job, which was a startup company based in Switzerland that wanted to do point-to-point suborbital transportation around the globe. So if you think about how long it takes to do an airline flight from the United States to, Europe, or, halfway around the world, I've actually been planning out some of these trips. It's many hours, half a day, full days sometimes of travel. But what if we could go in space for a few minutes and really cut that trip to half an hour or an hour at the most? That kind of rapid transportation around the globe has been thought of a lot in science fiction, but has not yet come to reality. And the company that I worked for was a startup that was wanting to do this kind of transportation with spaceports in Europe, in North America, in Asia, in South America. And I was based in Florida, helping them to establish their primary spaceport in Florida. And unfortunately, as startups go, like any other business, there are failures. And so this particular company failed. We were supposed to have a ramp up of activity in Florida, and I was supposed to run it, but that never happened. And here I was about to give birth to my first child. I was literally 9 months pregnant, clearing out the office at Kennedy Space Center, wondering what I was going to do. and I realized I know all of this experience, all of these interests, but I felt stuck because I didn't want to start a job search with a newborn. And so I had no business background at all, but I did have some experience part-time running a analyst segment of a market research company based in the space sector. And I had experience on now the business side of understanding how companies can advance their research, advance their projects, advance their R&D in space. And I had that business experience of helping companies understand why they might want to do point-to-point suborbital transportation or parabolic flights, because that was the initial thought, was start out with like a zero-G kind of corporation, kind of zero, getting into space with those parabola parabolas, which I've done before. It's fantastic. You can do it for fun. You can do it for science. I had a little bit of business experience, even though I don't have a business background. But as a scientist, I really did not know what I was doing when I started my own company about 7.5 years ago. I thought it was just going to be a temporary thing that I could work part-time while I figured out my next move. And so I founded Astralytical, not really understanding what it is I was trying to sell. But over the years, after a first disastrous year, I must say, because you learn the hard way sometimes about what works, what doesn't, what you need to do to properly align yourself with the market, how you need to talk about yourself and your offerings and your company, and who your ideal client is, and all these things as a scientist, I had never learned. I had to learn this the hard way. I had to eventually get some professional help from people who are experts in these areas to direct me about how to actually form a proper company. But it worked out. So here we are, 7 years later. Astralytical is growing strong. We do different types of consulting for businesses, nonprofits, and government agencies to help them grow in the space sector, to illuminate their path forward, either with expansion in the space sector or coming from the outside the industry and wanting to get into the space sector. And we also have another brand under lauraforczyk.com, which helps individuals get into the space sector, which is very much in alignment with what you are doing at EVONA, because it's so many people who have always loved space or recently realized all the really cool things that are happening in space and they want to get involved. So it's a lot of people coming from outside the industry, individuals who want to get in the space sector, either through starting their own companies or working for an existing company or investing in space. I help them to see what the possibilities are for them to work in space, even if they're not an engineer, even if they don't have a STEM degree.
Yeah, absolutely. That is really key, isn't it? That, it's not all about scientists and astronauts and engineers. And there's so many, other routes into the industry that a lot of them are non-technical, which I think is very surprising to a lot of people who, as you said, have this lifelong love of space and exploration, but never even kind of put two and two together to think that maybe they could do a job in that industry. And it's, I think that both of us here are very aligned on the view that space is for everyone and that space should be accessible to everyone. And that is really why we started the podcast in the first place, to kind of demystify the sector, lift the curtain on it really, and get people like yourself on here to speak about the journey they had into the industry. And it's never just one stop. It's always a bit of a winding path, trying different things out, but it just really highlights what is possible when you just follow what's interesting to you. So kind of on the topic of making space accessible for everyone, obviously a hot topic within this is diversity, or the lack thereof diversity, in not just space, but in STEM industries in general. The statistics are hard to believe when it comes to kind of the gender split and other kinds of diversities when we're looking at, how the sector is made up. But as a female leader within the sector yourself, what are your thoughts on the current diversity in the sector, and what more we can be doing as an industry to kind of impact this change now and for future generations?
It is still very monolithic, at least in the space circles that I am in. I have not seen it change much in terms of gender diversity, in terms of racial diversity, in terms of disabilities and people with disabilities working in the space sector. So there's so much work to be done. I think there's more awareness, but with that awareness needs to come action. Because I see a lot of lip service. I see a lot of people saying that this is important, but companies not really taking the action to put the money where their mouth is in terms of hiring or in terms of promoting or inclusion of different projects or speakers that they put on panels or on keynoters. Like that kind of diversity gets overlooked, but again and again and again, we see top people running space companies, the C-suite is men, and it's usually white men. And there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with that. It's just that when you leave out other voices, when you leave out other perspectives, it makes everything worse. It makes our viewpoints about the future worse. It makes viewpoints of what we are doing in terms of the space technology or the direction that we're going in worse. It doesn't allow us to think about things in new ways. And that's another thing that is somewhat becoming more common, but still lacking, is diversity of backgrounds. So a lot of the clients that work with do not come from the space industry. They come from other industries where they have different perspectives based on whichever industry they have come from, which can be invaluable to space, because space is such an insular sector where, yes, we span a lot of industries, but we tend to hire within only space communities. And that leaves out so many different perspectives of people who come from other types of industries, usually much more successful, much more established industries, to be honest with you. A lot more money flowing in a lot of other industries out there that these employees, they could have really great perspectives, but they're not given that chance in those companies to showcase what it is that they can do and that kind of background that they have. And so there's so much more that we can be doing with all types of diversity. I think we are seeing more diversity in terms of global representation, which I'm really glad to see. It seems like a lot of countries now are either starting government space agencies or starting initiatives to have commercial space sector pop up in their regions, or in some other ways promoting the space sector and different ways that people can get involved in space. And using space data is another one, because space is inherently global, and any industry around the world can use the space data that we've been gathering. So I think that's one area that I'm pretty optimistic about, is seeing the more global representation in the space sector.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. I think that's a really interesting point that you've touched on there about diversity of kind of experiences and backgrounds and perspectives. That's something that we have very recently published a piece on in the third part of our Inclusivity Drives Diversity series, where we're speaking about how, you know, we've come so far in terms of recognizing the need for diversity, but people are very hung up on the word diversity, and that often leads to people strategically hiring people that are visibly diverse and thinking that now they're a diverse organization and they've ticked all the boxes, but that is not an inclusive organization. And the route to diversity is inclusion, and you can't just be on the surface level ticking boxes, because you can't be bringing people that you deem to be diverse into an organization where they're not going to feel a sense of belonging. They're going to feel alienated. If it's an all older white male workforce, and you're bringing, it's tokenism when when you're selecting people in that way to hire. So it's really interesting that you've kind of brought that up, because that is really, it's thinking about the invisible diversity, not just the visible. Obviously visible diversity is crucial, but there is that diversity of backgrounds, of skills, experience. Even neurodiversity comes into this, because these people, neurodiverse people, have, it's just in the way their brain works, it's different to people who aren't neurodiverse, and they can draw different conclusions, they can view things from a different light, and just these unique ways of thinking that are influenced by so many areas of your life are really what is gonna, if we're all from the same village or we work at the same company, we're just going to talk ourselves into a corner, and there's only so many new ideas we can bring to the table if we all have shared backgrounds and experiences. So yeah, it's really, really interesting to hear you talk about that.
I think it's really important that we understand the benefits of bringing in people who think differently, and not only think differently, but have different ways of accomplishing the same goal. So different problem solution sets and different ways that we can tackle some kind of thing that we've been stuck on for so long, because then we see how disruptive that can be for the industry, where people for so long didn't think that we could have fully reusable rockets. Well, now that's starting to change, right? And so people who think in traditional ways, there's definitely a place for that. But sometimes you definitely need that diversity of thought that can come from either diversity of background or neurodivergence or some other way of thinking about a problem set. And yeah, that's the only thing that's going to boost us forward past where we are right now, is having those kinds of outside perspectives along with the different perspectives that come from different ways of thinking.
Yeah, completely. You're absolutely right there. And I think, hopefully through kind of conversations like these, we can open some people's eyes, both in and outside of the industry, people whose mindsets maybe need to change, leaders within the industry, and, people outside who potentially looking to join. So kind of on that same note, we think it's really important for kind of the people that are listening that, speaking about making space accessible for everyone, demystifying the sector kind of comes into that. So something we ask our guests is we touch on failures and achievements in the spirit of honesty and transparency, which I think is lacking in general in the world, not just in the space industry, with people with increased use of kind of social media and the internet, we get a lot of success stories and the final product, and people say, "Oh, amazing, look at what I've done," but they don't highlight the kind of the grind and the sacrifices that went into that. Um, so yeah, on the topic of this, in your career journey, what would you consider to be your biggest failure? What did you learn from that? And then on the other side of the fence, what is your biggest career achievement to date?
Every time I've had a pivot, it's because of a failure.
Yeah.
Just look at where people have pivoted in a very big direction, and that's usually either a major success or a major failure. And for me, it's been a lot of failures along the way. For example, my first graduate advisor and I did not get along. We butted heads, and so that was a big ordeal where it was a shared failure of her not understanding my goals and me not understanding her goals, and not us not aligning with a way to move forward successfully. And so I had to give up a NASA fellowship that I had and move on to a different university because I just could not continue working for somebody who wasn't aligned with what it is I truly wanted to do in my life. But I felt devastated because when you're a graduate student, it seems like the biggest decision in the world to leave graduate school. But I actually went to a different university where I got, again, all but dissertation. I'm all but dissertation twice over, which means that I passed all my courses. I passed all my exams and failed the exam the first time. That's another failure. Almost didn't pass it the second time. And for those who don't know the background of, science, when you pass those exams, it's all of the science, at least in the United States, it's all of the science that you've learned in graduate school. Your exam is written in oral and it's tough. And I almost failed that, along with then getting to that point of writing my dissertation and not finishing. And then I really coasted for like 2 years with my advisor, wondering if I'm ever going to finish. I got a full-time job and didn't finish my dissertation. And he's like, "You need to stop. This is not the path for you." And it was just him telling me what I already knew, but didn't admit it to myself. So I think being true to yourself is super important. You can't be misled by other people who might have good intentions. My first graduate advisor had good intentions about what she wanted for my life, but it wasn't what I wanted. And that I wasn't being honest with myself and with my second graduate program about what I truly wanted. I needed that outsider voice saying, "Actually, this is what you truly are going towards, and you just need to admit it to yourself." I think so much in academia, it's seen as a failure if you leave the university, and that's not true at all. So people define success differently. And along those same lines, like defining success differently. So I don't define success in my company to be revenue or number of employees or, number of clients. I define success differently. And so there's all these outside perspectives saying that you're failing in this direction, in that direction, you're not succeeding fast enough. And for me, it's just redefining how I look at success, which is a hard lesson learned because there's a lot of comparison going on when you're a small business owner or when you're a young or medium professional, where you are looking to see what other peers are doing and where they are in their careers and where they, similar businesses are, or you can't do that comparison. So that is a trap I fell into a lot. And I've had to take myself out of that because my success and failures are defined by the ways that I define success. And so for me, I think actually has been the biggest success, is allowing myself that time and freedom to define what it is I truly wanted to do in my life, in my career. And for me, that's being a mother of small children while running a business that gives me the freedom to pursue the directions that I want to go in. And I never want it to be the largest company. I never want to grow my company huge, but it will be impactful. And that, to me, I think is one of the great successes, is having that understanding of who I'm truly impacting. It's not just impacting corporations or impacting government entities. It's impacting the individuals. Each individual, whether it's somebody who wants to work in the space industry, or whether it's someone who wants to pivot their company into the space industry, or someone who just wants to have that understanding of how they can do better in their careers. I mean, all of that, those individuals, that to me is the impact that I want to have, mentoring students all the way up to helping people near retirement age fulfill that lifelong dream of working in space.
Absolutely. That's amazing. I really love that, the acknowledging the different definitions of success, because I think when the spirit of the work you're doing is to help people and to genuinely give people a leg up into an industry that you're passionate about, of course, the measure of success is kind of the impact that you have and the ways that you're helping these people. And, as you said, kind of mentoring them. And, on the topic of mentoring, that is really shocking about that you gave up a NASA fellowship. But that is, as you said, in the spirit of being true to yourself and honest with yourself and knowing what you want and who doesn't align with that. But that really, I think, that person could have, if you'd have been able to kind of communicate differently and work together differently, they could have been a mentor to you. But it just kind of shows the importance of these kind of relationships and how much they can affect you. And, well done for you for leaving. Like, congratulations. That is a very good choice to make. I'm sure at the time that wasn't an easy one. And I'm sure you had family and friends saying, stick it out. You're lucky to be there. Just stay, just stick it out, just suck it up. But look good. Well, you definitely should have left and, followed your own, what you're doing there, because that's not, if you weren't able to thrive in that environment, then I think that's a really good decision to make. And this kind of brings me on to something else that I want to discuss with you. Speaking about kind of mentors and, the importance of people, I see people as a resource, not in a necessarily a cold transactional way, but, in the way that, especially in the space industry, that networking and people, I think, are the number one resource. And this is, kind of in the spirit of making this a teachable moment for the people listening and giving some tangible advice. This is a bit of a two-part question, but so on your kind of route into the industry, what would you say were the best resources, whether that is people, mentors, courses, programs that you kind of identified over the years that helped you transition into the space industry? And then on a similar note, what advice would you give to someone who's kind of starting that journey, whether they're from a technical or a non-technical background, who are looking to kind of make their own way into the industry?
One of the things that I wish I had done sooner was reach out to the community, to people within the community, and learn from them and get advice from them and understand their career paths, because that could have helped me so much more. Professors mean well, but they have very limited points of view as to what the career path might look like for their students. And so for me, as an undergraduate, as an early graduate student, I was focused solely on the type of career that is very much promoted in universities, which is a professorship. And, that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do, but I didn't know any better. If I had started earlier looking outside universities, which I did start to do later in graduate school, I would see the diversity of options in front of me. I didn't realize that, for example, scientists can get involved in policy, and in fact, absolutely need to get involved in policy to explain it to policymakers about what laws are needed or what regulations are needed or why funding needs to go to this area. I didn't realize that there was so many business opportunities in space. I for some reason had this impression that it was NASA. And I think a lot of people just think it's just NASA, or think it's ESA, or, like they don't necessarily understand that there's a diversity of ways that you can get involved in space until they start really reaching out and looking and talking to the people who are already doing these jobs, and then recognizing that those jobs are going to evolve over time, and that there are new jobs that don't exist yet that will come on board in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And that is really exciting, because if you can envision it, it will happen. It might not happen in your lifetime, but maybe it will. And maybe you need to align yourself. And the only way to do that is to be proactive and start talking to people and start getting involved. So it's two-pronged. It's not just the talking, right? You actually have to start then getting out there. So that could be volunteering for an organization, a space organization that's local or one that's national or international. It could be, getting involved in like star parties or rocket clubs and really learning how to launch or use a telescope. Or it could be getting involved in working groups and writing papers or going to the UN. I mean, I know students who do that. There are really so many different ways, depending on your backgrounds and your interests, to get involved beyond what your degree says, beyond what professors have told you is possible, because there's an infinite number of jobs out there that you could either get involved in right now or create later. And I think that's the most exciting thing about space, is that there's that vision of openness, that yes, timeframes are uncertain, but you can work towards it. Yeah, we're not sending miners to Mars yet. You're going to go,
not yet.
But you can still do robotics where the robot is digging in Mars, for example. Like, there's just so many different ways that you can envision what you truly want and then find a way to make it happen.
Yeah, exactly. I love the kind of the mention of the jobs that don't exist yet. I think that was one of the first pieces I wrote when I joined EVONA. It was my first time working in a kind of a space organization. And I wrote, what was it called? Oh yeah, Space Careers of the Not So Distant Future. And I was talking about space doctors, space lawyers. Space lawyers is very much a thing, I'm now aware. But
So are space doctors.
pardon?
Space doctors are a thing too.
Exactly. It's so interesting, and that's so they're not even the good ones. That was my first understanding of asteroid mining, space psychology to help people who are feeling isolated in space. How do people live together? Space farming and what they're doing on the International Space Station, not just for food, but also for mood, to boost people's moods on the International Space Station. I think it just goes to show that anything you are interested in, anything, whatever your skill is, whatever your background is, whatever you want to do, you could do it in space. And that goes for, I can't think of a job that, I honestly can't think of a job that doesn't apply to. I'm sure there are some. I'm sure some people will let me know some that I've missed. But, that's the kind of the wonder of the sector, isn't it? And, yeah, you don't know what jobs exist yet, but it's just the endless opportunities. So yeah, that's kind of what we're trying to do here, open up people's minds to kind of explore something that, had they not heard us speak about this, had they never stumbled across a conversation or a piece of content, they may never have kind of opened their eyes up to the possibility. So Laura, it's been so great to hear about kind of your journey, what got you inspired, what got you, kind of the amalgamation of things that led you to kind of into your niche today and how you're using your skills to help people, to bring people up. Um, so kind of looking forward and kind of overarching into your thoughts of kind of the space sector in general, just my final question is, so what are your thoughts on the current status of the space sector and how do you see this evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
It's a bit of a contradiction to say that space is both rapidly changing and also slow to change. And we can imagine all these futures, all these future jobs that we were just discussing. And we can also look at science fiction, whether that's movies or books or TV shows, or there's so many really great ideas out there about what humanity can do in space. And again, it benefits life on Earth. So this has never been about like just abandoning Earth. Earth is always going to be our protective home. But understanding that it will take a long time. It will take a long time for humans to get to Mars and start living there. It'll take a long time for us to actually start mining asteroids and having that be a profitable business case. And all these other things that we can imagine, it does take time. But while I'm saying that, to be patient and understand that things take time, it is so quickly evolving. Where,
Mhm.
a decade ago, Falcon 9 was not the workhorse of the world that it is today. We didn't have reusable rocketry that was continuously launching and landing, launching and landing. Starship is probably going to change things again in ways that we can't even predict. And the ways that the International Space Station is retiring and moving to take a place in our hearts that will now be commercial space stations. So as much as I love ISS and will be sad to see it go, I'm extremely excited about the possibility of commercial space stations and all the different use cases and users and the ways that we can get involved internationally with different types of research and different tourism opportunities and all these different ways that we bring
Mhm.
people together under the umbrella of space, which is, again, inherently global. And so the industry is rapidly evolving, but at the same time, we need to understand that things do take time. And so to wrap it up, you need to know that, yes, you can make that difference. And yes, you can make that change. And just be a little bit patient that it's not going to happen overnight, but you can actually be the one to be working in some of these areas that makes some of the biggest change in humanity in this century.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great kind of closing point because I know a lot of when, recently I know we went to speak at a school with children and a lot of the pushback we got was why are we what's the point? Why are we like they were saying, we've already ruined life on Earth. Why are we going into space? That I know positive thoughts from the youth, but it's about these great, people think these things, let's challenge them, it's how do you think we're combating we're climate change from space, we're monitoring the environment, we're revolutionizing farming and agriculture, we're monitoring the oceans, there's so many things we're doing. And yeah, exactly as you said, people listening could be if they kind of open up their minds to the point of why we're doing what we're doing, why we're in space, why we're pushing space exploration, it is for the benefit of humanity and life on Earth. And there are endless opportunities in the coming years for people to impact them, change themselves and get involved in doing some long-lasting good for the planet from space.
Exactly. And that could also be a cognitive shift that more and more people, more and more quote unquote normal people will be able to go into space, even if it's just for 5 minutes, or go to near space with high altitude balloons and be able to see that perspective that we don't often get to see of our planet being a small, fragile place that every human being that we've ever known has lived, and therefore we need to protect our planet and understand that we're all interconnected. I mean, that overview effect, that term that was coined by Frank White, I mean, I think that's going to become monumental as more and more people get to fly into space, which a lot of people think it's just billionaires, spending money, wasting money on a wild ride. And that, there's something to be said that is true, but it's also understanding that change that comes with each individual, and those billionaires can make those changes along with individual who are not billionaires, who just get a chance to fly through sponsorships or through research, where they can have that shift in mentality and see the ways that we can protect our planet or make things better on Earth in terms of, in terms of the geopolitics or international relations or the way that we do industry on Earth that pollutes, and how we can change things from just changing our perspective.
Yeah, completely. I hope that, maybe one day my job will get me on one of those balloons. I would do anything to go to just above the curvature, just give me 5 minutes and I'd be a changed person forever. Well, it's not just for millionaires or billionaires, is it? I've seen the tickets aren't cheap, but it's cheaper than I thought it might be. So hopefully once we keep making space more accessible, we can bring that cost down, and as we said, quote unquote, normal people can get that experience and, have that kind of, the change of mindset and the just kind of flip. I think it would just flip your view on life and humanity just to be able to experience it from that height. You would come down a pacifist. Whoever goes up there, you would come down a changed person. It would be incredible. One day, fingers crossed for us, both of us.
We both.
Yeah, I'll see you up there, hopefully. Right, well, Laura, that's our time, but really appreciate you coming on here. It's been so great to meet you and speak with you about your journey and kind of what you stand for, which is very much what we stand for. So it's really nice to kind of get into this with you and talk about, the problems in the sector and how we can combat them, and kind of the reality that a lot of people don't see, and how we can kind of move forward and create a prosperous future for the industry. So thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak with me. I really appreciated it and I hope to speak again soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having me. This was fun. You take care.
You too. Speak soon.